Hello and welcome to Salt and Light. This podcast was recorded in front of a live audience as part of the Biblical Citizenship class at Father's House Church. I hope you will enjoy this dialogue with Representative Jim Walsh.
Well, this evening, I'm going to put up another picture up here just for a moment. So if you have any questions, you can text them to me. So we'll keep that up for a sec here. And we'll keep going back to this slide. So the main thing we'll talk about tonight is what's happening in the state legislature with Jim here. But if it's something that resonated in what we just saw, you can also text me that and we'll try to get to that point as well. So, all right. Well, Jim, it's an honor to have you here. So if you do not know Jim, give him a big round of applause. So Jim is the state representative for LD19. So in Washington, there are 49. 49
counties are 49 legislative districts. 39 counties, 49 legislative districts.
49. So he represents 19, and 19 is basically Cowlitz to the west of I-5. It is Wahkiakum, Pacific, and part of Lewis. And
Part of Lewis, part of Thurston, and part of Grays Harbor. So it's part or all of 6 counties. It's a big district.
So how did you end up in politics, Jim? How did you find your way into Olympia?
Well, I was not somebody who thought his whole life he was going to be in politics. I have a company, a publishing company, very specialized technical publishing company that I own and run, and that was really my life's work. But I have 5 kids, and I didn't like what we were seeing happening in schools, and I didn't like what we were seeing happening with law enforcement, with crime, and particularly with drugs. Then it was heroin and methamphetamine. Lately it's fentanyl. And I thought the state was not going in the right direction in trying to do something about schools that weren't teaching kids very effectively, and state law that was not keeping neighborhoods safe. And with those 2 thoughts, I tried to recruit other people to run for the legislature in Olympia. And after the 3rd or 4th one said, "What are you talking about, man? You should be running," I gave in and ran. That was in 2016, when I was first elected in 2016, and been reelected every 2 years ever since then. So now I'm in my 5th term in Olympia. And the structure of government in Olympia, as many of you know, parallels the structure of government at the federal level in D.C. There are 3 branches of government, of course. The executive, which in D.C. is represented by the President of the United States. In Olympia, it's represented by several elected positions, but the governor primarily. There's the legislative branch. In D.C., there are 2 chambers of that legislative branch, the Congress and the U.S. Senate. Likewise, in Olympia, there are 2 chambers, the State House and the State Senate. And then, of course, the 3rd branch of government are the judges, the judicial branch. And at the federal level, the judges are appointed by the president, whether those judges are the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, or the appeals courts, the federal trial courts. They're appointed by the president, and those are generally lifetime appointments. At the state level, we treat judges a little differently. At the state level, our state judges are elected, whether they're trial judges or appeals judges or the state Supreme Court. But if a judge retires in the middle of a 4-year term, the governor can appoint a temporary replacement. And the practice has become in our state that judges almost always retire in the middle of their term, so the governor can appoint the temporary replacement, who then can run as the incumbent judge at the next election. And the election of our judges in our state is very complicated, and it needs some reform. It's not law but there are rules among judges and among attorneys in our state that limit what someone running for judge can say. And so our judge elections are really problematic because judges won't say where they stand on an issue. They don't affiliate with any party. They're nonpartisan elections for judges. So people really have very poor idea of who a judge is and what they stand for, what their philosophy is, what their approach to the law is. And so incumbent judges, even if they've just been appointed recently, have a big advantage because they're the incumbents.
Yeah. Wow. Aren't you appreciating hearing how some of these things work and are able to grasp that? Because looking from the outside in, it's hard sometimes to see what's going on. So, so in Olympia, we have the House and we have the Senate, So let's say we have all these bills that are coming up right now. So what is the process when someone says, hey, I think this should become a bill? What's the process from that happens until it actually becomes law?
Yeah, the process is really the same either in D.C. with the federal government or in Olympia for the state government. At the state level, it's a little easier. At the federal level, of course, there are 98 people like me in Olympia. There are 435 people in Congress in D.C. So it's a little harder there just because there are more players, more things going on. But the process is basically the same both in D.C. and in Olympia for getting an idea turned into law. What you can do is approach a legislator, tell them a problem you have or an idea you have for fixing a problem, and they can draft a bill to be considered by the legislature, and it can become law. Most bills that become law really aren't new ideas. Most bills that become law are modifying or updating some existing law. At the federal level, the body of law is called the United States Code, USC. Not the college, the law in the federal level. And at the state level, the body of statutory law is called the Revised Code of Washington, RCW. Some of you have probably run into RCWs if you're trying to build a house or start a business or things like that. So you come to you have to reach out to a legislator. Only legislators can propose law, can propose bills. The legislator will write up a bill that has to meet certain kind of format requirements. It has to reference whatever chapter of existing law the idea applies to. If it changes an existing law or upstates an existing law, it has to reference that section of existing law very specifically. And then it has to fit a format explaining what the intent of the law is, and then specifically what the law will say that must be done or can't be done or should be done or might be done by the people or by agencies of government or whatever section of the RCW the bill would affect, would impact, would change. Many legislators don't actually write their bills by themselves. They go to experts outside the legislature and ask for advice. Sometimes lobbyists and other outsiders who represent industries or interest groups will help draft laws, bills. But the most effective legislators will write at least the first draft of a bill themselves. Then we submit the draft legislation to the kind of staff of attorneys who work for the legislature, and this is true in D.C. or in Olympia. In Olympia, we call that staff of attorneys who review proposed bills the Office of the Code Reviser, OCR. And they have attorneys who work there who look at proposals and basically edit them. They'll help make sure that the legal references are right, that the changes to existing law or a new section of new law fits in mechanically legally with the other sections of law. Now, they don't write a bill, but they help make sure that a bill as drafted works, that it doesn't have mechanical problems. Now, they don't warrant that the idea is constitutional. They don't check that. They just check to make sure that the details, the mechanics of the bill basically would work. And then when you get the bill back from the Office of the Code Reviser as a legislator, you have the opportunity to get other legislators to join you to co-sponsor the bill before it's filed to be considered as law. And that's a political process. It's always a good idea to try to get a few co-sponsors on a bill. Sometimes you want them from both political parties or multiple spots on the political spectrum. Sometimes you want them to be from other parts of the state so that you get a geographic balance of support for the proposal. And then you submit the bill to the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate, and it becomes filed. It gets a bill number. It becomes entered into kind of the process, the system, and then you petition for a hearing at the committee level. The legislature, members of the legislature, Senate, House, it's the same, are assigned committees, and the committees are the first stage in kind of testing and vetting a bill that wants to become law. The committee will review it. The committee may make suggestions for changing this piece or that piece. Essentially, it's another level of review. The committee will consider the bill, and the committees are organized by kind of topic. For example, there's a transportation committee. There's a judiciary committee. There's a natural resources committee. There's an education committee. So the bills are assigned to committees based on the substance, the material in the bill. And the members of the respective committees are supposed to know their subject matter a little bit. If you serve on the education committee for a few years, it's kind of like going to college or graduate school. You come to know the law on education. And as a legislator who sits on that committee, you're expected to know what would work, what would not work, what would be a big change, what would be a little change. And the committee reviews it. The committee chews on it. They may recommend changes. Those take the form of amendments at the committee level that would amend the bill. And then the committee votes on the bill. They decide whether the bill should proceed to the whole legislature. So the committees are kind of gatekeepers for bills. Once they've voted on a bill, if they vote to approve a bill, to pass it on to the legislature as a whole, it then goes through a couple other review processes, but then it is presented to the whole legislature to consider. Here, the Speaker of the House on the House side and the Majority Leader on the Senate side, they don't call it a Speaker, they call it a Majority Leader, have a great deal of power, because the Speaker and the Majority Leader in the two chambers, the House and the Senate, can decide which bills actually get a debate and a vote in front of the whole legislature. That's why when you hear in the news about the Speaker of the House having being an important position, having a lot of power, ultimately the Speaker's power is they decide which bills go to the floor of the legislature for a big debate and a big vote. If the bill passes, gets to the floor of the whole legislature, gets a big debate, those are the ones you tend to see on TV, the ones that can go all night, the ones that can become very passionate. The floor debates and the floor votes are kind of where the action is. The committees tend to be more academic and a little less emotional. The floor debates are where the real fur flies and the emotional back and forth happens. If it passes the floor vote, it's not law yet. It then has to go to the other chamber. So if it started in the House, it has to go to the Senate. If it started in the Senate, it has to go to the House. The whole process starts over again. The bill that's passed through one chamber goes to the other chamber, and then the committee in the other chamber reviews the bill, has the more academic intellectual debate, maybe make some more amendments, and then if the leader of the other chamber decides, then it gets to the floor of the other chamber where there's a floor debate, more emotional, more fur-flying, gets a vote, and then if it passes both chambers, it then goes to the executive desk. So in DC, that's the president. In Olympia, that's the governor. And the governor then has the choice of signing it into law when it becomes law, or vetoing it, not signing it into law, and saying, no, I'm not going to sign this, it doesn't become law, and then it goes back to the legislature for reconsideration. The legislature, of course, can override the executive's veto. That requires a 2/3 vote of the legislature, and if that's the case, then the bill becomes law even though the governor tried to say no. So it is a complicated, time-consuming process. It's very rare for an idea to become a bill, to get through committees and 2 chambers to the governor's desk all in 1 year. It is more often that it takes several tries for an idea to become a bill, to get through the committees, to get through the chambers, to get to the governor or the president and become law. So there's an ongoing kind of process when you have an idea, and if you've been involved in it or if you've spoken to people who have, it's very common for a good idea, even a good idea that people agree on, even a good idea that's just a small change in law, to take 2 or 3 or 4 years to get through.
Wow. So there'll be a test on that later on, so you can figure that out.
I'm not sure I would pass it, so.
No, it's super helpful to know, though. And I think one thing that's different from DC is that your sessions are so much shorter. So that's why everything happens fast and it's full speed. So how many bills are coming up? How many bills are being filed, and then how long is this is the long session, I believe, right? So how
Correct.
long,
We're in a long session
would that be for those to go through?
The number of bills that are filed each session, I mean, there's no control. It's as many bills as legislators want to file. So it varies somewhat, but generally it'll be in the neighborhood of 1,200 bills, something like that will be filed in a session. Of that, about 400 will get through committee. And of those, maybe half that get to a floor vote, maybe 200, usually less than that, usually more like 100. And then when many of the 100 or so that get to the floor of the chamber for a vote, many are small technical bills that are not controversial and get voted on very quickly. It's probably a couple of dozen bills that are the ones that result in overnight debates and very emotional back and forth and close votes. The vast majority of bills are non-controversial and will be voted on with, if not unanimous votes, very strong bipartisan votes. But those aren't the ones that define the kinds of issues we're talking about here. The ones that define the kind of issues we're talking about here are the ones that are more controversial and are harder. Yeah.
You said about the partisan line. So where's the left-right division in Olympia right now in regards to numbers? Because sometimes it's been really close, sometimes it's been far, and it feels like it's very much on one side of the aisle right now.
For the last 6 or 8 years, it has been on one side of the aisle. The progressive left has had a very strong majority in Olympia. Now, that's recently changed in D.C., but right now in Olympia, in the state Senate, there are 49 positions. It's 30 to 19. The Democrats have 30 seats in the Senate, and the Republicans have 19. In the House, it's essentially the same number on a percentage basis. There are 98 members, and it's 59 to 39. So it's a minuscule bit better on a percentage basis in the House, but essentially it's a 60-40 split. I'm rounding, but it's essentially a 60-40 split in Olympia. In D.C., it's different. The Republicans have narrow majorities in both the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress. In the Senate, they actually have a little bit larger majority. I believe it's 54-46. Republican, 54, Democrats 46. In the Congress, it's razor close. The Republicans have a majority of about two or three votes. So it's roughly 220 to 216 or 17. So it's very close in the Congress. But the Republicans have the majority in both chambers in D.C. About 6 years ago in Olympia, there was what was called a coalition control of the state Senate. There was a coalition led by Republican members, but some conservative Democrat members were with them, and they had a majority in the state Senate. So it was about 20 Republicans or 21 Republicans, and then 4 Democrats who were conservative Democrats joined with the Republicans to make a majority in the state Senate in Olympia. When that was happening, we were able to keep some of then Governor Jay Inslee's worst ideas in check. What happened was a couple of the conservative Democrats lost their jobs to more liberal Democrats who did not join with the Republicans. That broke the coalition, and then Inslee started getting more of his ideas through. At the moment, we're about at that stage, where we were after that coalition broke, and the Democrats, and I really don't like to talk Democrat and Republican that much. The problem isn't Democrat, Republican, it's progressive left versus everyone else is what it really is. The progressive left, they have really become more outspoken, more aggressive, more extreme, frankly, in the things they propose. And that's why you've heard a lot of issues lately about things like parental rights being attacked, K-12 education being attacked, any kind of law enforcement, support for law enforcement being attacked. That's because they have become very aggressive and kind of assertive in their far left ideology. When we had the ability to check them on that bipartisan coalition, the far left was sort of more timid. They were more careful. They've become emboldened, and they're pushing much more aggressive ideas. Now, they don't have a supermajority. You'll hear some talk of supermajorities. Basically, a supermajority is a 2/3 majority in the legislature. They don't have that, but they do have very strong, simple majorities.
Yeah. I think, for us, it's important to know that we still make a difference. It's easy sometimes to think that because things have changed in DC, things automatically would change here. Well, that's not the case. Or we think that it's so hard in Washington, so why stay? But obviously we need to stay and fight, because if we go somewhere else, we're literally just punting the ball down the field, really, right? So how can we, other than at the voting booth, how do we speak to these issues, and do people actually listen when we make phone calls, when we sign in online? What makes a difference? What have you seen that help shift and stop some of the more insane bills maybe, and brought some more sanity to the situation?
Well, I do think that participating helps. Some people say, well, it doesn't matter if you call, it doesn't matter if you go online and vote pro or con on a piece of legislation or a budget or whatever it is. I disagree. I think it does help, and we've seen it help lately in a number of ways. You might have seen on social media or heard about on TV or radio, we as conservatives and as constitutional people have gotten much better at going online to the state legislature in Olympia. The website is leg.wa for Washington, .gov, G-O-V, leg.wa.gov. And at that website, there are those links you can click on that will take you to pages, internet pages, where you can comment on legislation, bills that are at the committee level or at the floor debate level. And And we publicize some of these links to make it easy so you can just click directly to the comment page. And you can, the simplest thing to do that you can do as any person in the state, as a citizen, is click pro or con. I like this idea or I don't like this idea. And we have been able to do some good, even though we're working from a minority position, to stop bad bills based on large public response. You may have seen that there was a very large public response against a bill to raise property taxes. There was a very large public response against a bill to limit burning logs in your fireplace. That's a bill in Olympia that would make that illegal to have a wood-burning fireplace. There was very strong response to a couple of the bills that would undermine the Parents' Bill of Rights. That's been in the news a lot just lately. But there have also been strong support for good bills. There's a state Senate proposal to limit the governor's emergency powers during a declared emergency. That one got very large public support, pro. And so there have been some good news as well. We've been able to stop a couple of bills at the committee level so they don't get to the floor of the chamber for a vote because of the public outcry about them. For example, there was a firearms bill, a gun rights bill, that would have required, if you own a gun, that you buy a liability insurance policy or post a personal bond for the cost of about $25,000. If you owned a firearm, you would have to buy this liability insurance or post a personal bond with the state. The outcry was so strong against that proposal, and it's unconstitutional, it was problematic for a bunch of reasons, that they withdrew the bill. Well, you can't really withdraw a bill, but the sponsor said, I don't want to push this bill anymore because it's too unpopular. So to the question, is it worth it to call or to go on that internet link and click and say, I'm against this? Yes, it is worth it. Good things can happen.
One of the more insane bills that seems to come across, and sometimes I wonder, how do they come up with these ideas? But one is about the Washington state flag. And just as a comment, when we toured just on Tuesday, the House side, we saw all the desks, and we noticed that on one side of the room, there were American flags and the Washington state flags on the desk, and the other side, it was not at all, and we were trying to figure out what was happening, and we asked the guide who was there, and he said, well, that's the conservative side, and that's the liberal side. And with this bill of wanting to redesign a state flag, what's the thinking here? Is this kind of erasing the past?
Well, I mean, you're asking the wrong guy, Sam. I can't stand that bill. It's a move in many states to redesign state flags. You probably know our state flag. It's a green field with the seal of the state in the middle of it. And the seal is a black circle with a white portrait of George Washington. I mean, our state is Washington. We're named after George Washington. And so that's our flag. And there is a movement among the progressive left. They believe that George Washington was a bad man, and they want him taken off the flag. And they don't even know exactly what they want to replace it, but there are a couple of proposals. One is a kind of stylized, squiggly thing that is supposed to be mountains, but it doesn't really look like mountains. And then one, and this has happened in other states, is this very abstract 5-point star. The 5-point star has meaning to some people. Yep. And it is not, in my opinion, a good idea. I like our picture of George Washington, which is the state's seal, yep, on the green banner flag. It's a good flag. I think we should stick with our flag. Very
good. One of the things that I believe is overwhelming for many is, there's so many bills, and where do you find this information? And so like you mentioned, the judges, where would we go to find out who to vote for? What are some good resources that are, can clearly say these are the issues that's at stake, and this is the values or the votes they've had in the past, and I know that goes for members of the House as well and so forth. So what would you recommend as some kind of shortcuts for us to look at that shares our conservative and biblical values in regards to candidates and issues?
Sure, that's a great question. I mean, social media has become a useful tool for getting this kind of information out. But there are organizations that are trustworthy that vet both general, candidates for governor and the executive branch and legislative candidates and judge candidates. I mean, obviously, the two state parties both have their websites, both the Republican and Democrat, the two major parties, and you can get information there. There is a group talking particularly about the judges, and the judges are so difficult because they're not party, they're not Republican or Democrat or anything. They're not party at all. And then they have all these rules, as I said. Now, it's not law, but it's ethics rules among judges that they won't speak to issues substantively. So there is a new organization called Full Court Press, and they have fullcourtpress.com, I believe it is, based in Washington State, that is trying to get information out on judges, on their voting history, if they've been in office, if they've been on the bench, their not voting history, but their opinions, their rulings history, and if they haven't been on the bench, what their background is as an attorney or whatever kind of work they've done that would be relevant to being a judge. And Full Court Press is an affiliate organization of a group called Project 42. And Project 42, Washington is the 42nd state, is a kind of think tank and an umbrella organization that coordinates a number of groups. They're not explicitly Republican, although they lean conservative. I wouldn't say they're necessarily biblical in value either, but they line up well with biblical values. There are other groups too. There's a pure policy think tank called the Washington Policy Center that is very good. They're not biblical at all, but they are constitutional. And so much of our public policy and politics in this day, at this time, a reverence for the Constitution, whether federal or state, and biblical values actually line up pretty well. So while it's difficult, particularly in Washington, to find organizations that are explicitly biblical, there are a number that are constitutional, and I think you'll find that lines up well. One of the things I talked to Sam about when we were listening was there was that bit that Rick Green did talking about George Mason, one of the founders of the country, and his reference to the frequent recurrence to core values, in his case, biblical values. Well, in our state constitution, the Washington State Constitution, Article 1, Section 32, uses that exact language. In the Constitution, the state constitution, it says, here we go, that a recurrence to fundamental principles is essential to defend individual rights and good government. That's in our state constitution right now. So I think you'll find that a reverence for the Constitution and the reverence for biblical values, they're not the same, but they're parallel in many good ways, and this is one example of it. The thing to remember about the state constitution, different than the federal, is the state constitution, in our Washington State Constitution, the Bill of Rights is Article 1. It's the first part of the Constitution. In the federal Constitution, of course, the Bill of Rights comes at the end. And I think it's interesting and informative that in our state, that the Bill of Rights is the first thing the Constitution talks about. So individual rights has always been the top priority of Washington State in the documents of our state government. Man, my colleagues in Olympia have forgotten that for decades.
Yeah. One of the other ways we can be engaged in Washington, and this is somewhat unique, it's getting harder and harder across the U.S., is the initiative process. And can you share just a little bit, what is the initiative process and what is trying to happen, what are they trying to do in Olympia to eliminate that voice that we have there?
Yeah. So the Washington State, we're talking about the Constitution. The Washington State Constitution reserves several rights to the people regardless of what the government does. And one of the rights it reserves to the people, and these are functions of government rights. I mean, it reserves all kinds of rights to the people, but two are really relevant to the function of government. And one of those, really the main one, is the right the people have to initiative, to create law by initiative, and to use a referendum to overturn a bad law. And it's essential in this state that we have the initiative and referendum processes are often linked together. They're slightly different in that an initiative can make new law or overturn bad existing law. A referendum only overturns bad law. Now that's in our state, that's in Washington. Other states use the words in different ways. But here in Washington, an initiative can either make new law or overturn bad law. A referendum can only overturn bad law. And that'll tell you something, that there are two ways to overturn bad law, but only one way to make new law. So that tells you what the more important thing is. I believe in the initiative process. I've authored several initiatives that have become law, and so obviously I like the system and I want to keep it. An initiative works very much like a bill that we just talked about, except it doesn't start with a legislator. It can start with anyone. Now, as it happens, I've written a few, but you don't have to be in the legislature to do it. Anyone can. Many of you are familiar with Tim Eyman, who is kind of a reformer, a provocateur in government. And Tim Eyman has never been in the legislature, but he's written a number of initiatives that have become law. And so anyone can write an initiative. It has to follow the same format I talked about, and that it has to express an intent and then express specifically what sections of law it either changes or adds to, if it's a new law. And it has to fit the same format and structure and how it looks and reads that a bill has to. But you don't have to be in the legislature to do it. You draft it, you file it with the government, the state government, with the State Secretary of State's office, and then the State Secretary of State's office basically takes it over to that same office of the code reviser I mentioned. They do the same kind of edit. They make sure that all of its legal references are accurate and that it would work mechanically as a new law. And then they send it back to the Secretary of State, who gives it a number, an initiative number, similar to a bill number. And then the people have to support the initiative. It has to go out for signatures. Registered voters in Washington have to sign petitions in support of the initiative. The number of signatures you need to qualify an initiative changes based on how many people voted in the last general election. But generally speaking, it's about 350,000 signatures that you need to qualify an initiative. And initiative people who support them, they try to get more because there's a checking system for the signatures, and you always want to have more than you need because some signatures will get rejected. So you go out and you gather those signatures, and that's traditionally been the hardest part, is gathering 350,000 plus signatures. But there are organizations who've become very good at doing that. So you gather the signatures, and then the initiative can go one of either two ways. It can either then go to the people at the next general election to be voted on, yes or no, or depending on whether it's declared an initiative of the people or an initiative of the legislature, it can go to the legislature like a bill, where the legislature can either vote on it up or down. It doesn't have to have a committee hearing, goes straight to the chambers for a vote. And the interesting thing about an initiative to the legislature is the governor has no role. The governor doesn't sign it and can't veto it. If the legislature votes for an initiative of the people, it becomes law without the governor's signature. He's got no role. And that certainly sent the previous Governor Inslee around the end, because we conservatives did a number of initiatives to the legislature. We got the signatures, it qualified, and then it went to the legislature. They were passed into law, and the governor had no ability to veto. Those were the initiatives that restored police pursuits of criminal suspects. Remember, those had been banned for a while here. They're good law now. The police can chase. One was the Parents' Bill of Rights, which became law because the legislature voted on an initiative from the people, and the Governor Inslee had said he was going to veto it if it came through, and we said, well, you can't because it's an initiative. And as well as a couple of others. You can also have initiatives that go straight to the people for a vote. That recently was the initiative that restored natural gas. There had been a bill passed in Olympia that banned the use of natural gas for heating or cooking in new homes and new businesses. The initiative went straight to the people. That one didn't go to the legislature. It went straight to the people, and the people voted on the initiative, which meant keep natural gas. And so I love the initiative process. It's an important check on a radical, extreme legislature. And no surprise, the radicals and extremists in the legislature are now trying to run bills that will eliminate the initiative process. They can't eliminate it because it's in the Constitution, but they can make it more difficult to gather signatures. And one of their bills now is you can't use petitions anymore. Every signature will have to be on its own piece of paper. Or the people collecting signatures for an initiative have to verify that each signature is, with an ID, is a legal citizen of the state. Well, we don't even do that for voting in elections. So they're just trying to make it more difficult to get the signatures to qualify an initiative because they can't change the Constitution, even though they'd like to. One of the far left legislators had predicted before the last election, last November, that the progressive left was going to get super majorities, 2/3 majorities in Olympia, and they could change the Constitution. They did not get that many seats. They can't change the Constitution.
Speaking of those seats, one of the ways we change is by getting out to vote. And we do voter registration here at church. We encourage people to vote. In Washington State, you can collect votes as well. And I just heard from Family Policy Institute of Washington, which is one of the resources you can look at in regards to.
We forgot to mention. Yeah, Sam's right. It's Family Policy Institute of Washington, which is fpiw.org. Their website is another place where they talk about candidates and political issues in a good way.
Yeah, and what they find out in the last election, so last presidential election in November, there was 1.3 million Christians that didn't vote in Washington State.
Washington State alone.
Washington State, and the governor, how many votes did Ferguson get?
Won by about 400,000.
Right, but he had, 1.5, 1.7?
The total, it was 1.67 in the end.
Yeah, so any issue on the ballot could be changed in a biblical sense if Christians got out to vote.
And there's no question that Christian believers of any faith, but Christians particularly, are disheartened.
Yep.
They believe that in Washington State it doesn't matter, elections are rigged, you can't win, and that's not true. I mean, most of you live in this area in the 19th district. 8 years ago this district was considered untouchably blue. It was a progressive left area, and in 8 years we've switched it to being one of the most conservative districts in the state. And I mean, you can do it.
Yeah.
You just have to get out the vote. You have to talk to people. You have to knock on a lot of doors. And what Sam's talked about, that collecting of ballots, the term in politics is ballot harvesting. And a lot of people find that like a dirty word. They don't like ballot harvesting. That is when you collect the ballot for someone you know and you take it to the county auditor's office over in Kelso and
Yep.
over there and drop it off for them. That is legal in Washington. Now, in some states, that practice is illegal. But in this state, it's legal. So it's entirely legal for you to organize, have a list of people who are members of this congregation and make sure they're all voting. And if they're not, you can go to their house, their apartment, and they can pick up the ballot and you can take it over to the county admin building and drop it off. That's entirely legal in Washington. And this church and some other churches and Family Policy Institute, as like an umbrella organization of churches, is trying to get more churches to do that.
Yeah, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if we think that we can't change anything. So we need to change our language. We need to be working for a change in our state and to keep fighting. Because if we disengage, who will make the policies? People who don't share our values. And there's nothing more spiritual than just than to step away. We need to pray and work, right? We need to pray for the peace of the city where God has placed us, and we need to work for it as well. So pray and work. And so that's why we're putting this on, and that's why we get to have fantastic people like Jim here sharing and give you more insight, give you more tools, and help educate you in what we can do. So Jim, thank you so much for being here.
Sure. It's always good to see you guys and talk.
Can we pray for you?